I think without any further ado, I would like to introduce George Brown, who is our speaker this evening. So just a quick note on the questions and the general format. George is going to speak to us. He's quite happy to take any questions that anyone has, going through the presentation. We will also have plenty of time for questions and a bit of conversation at the end. So if it can wait, hold it till the end. If not, then just butt in and ask your question, I think. Yeah, but otherwise, George is a dairy farmer, farming in Hampshire, I believe. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his story and how he's gotten to where he is today. So take it away, George.
Cheers, Chris. And I am assuming everyone can hear me, and someone will let me know if they can't. So I guess thank you to Duncan for inviting me along to sort of be a part of this. Very grateful for that opportunity. Just by way of a sort of structure, plan was to do a sort of chronological look at what the inverted commas story has been so far, and then I suppose touch on some of the kind of principles that I guess have helped me a bit, I think, along the way. My intention isn't to go on for too long. We're aiming for about 20 minutes. I think possibly saying that because everyone always says they're going to talk for 20 minutes, but we'll aim for 20 minutes. If you have any questions, do just butt in. I would be a bit of a technophobe, so please don't go with the niceties of raising a hand. Just speak over me and I will stop. So very happy to take some questions. But yeah, again, happy if you think there's some stuff at the end you want to talk about, we can go through that as well. So sort of by way of a background, yeah, family were non-farming, born in London. So we moved out to rural Essex when I was a kid. And aged 15, was looking at summer holiday jobs and did that kind of typical thing of washing up in a pub. And then realized actually I could be paid the same amount of money to drive around in a pickup chasing some sheep. And one of those two things felt like it was a lot more fun. So sort of got more and more into holiday jobs, working on farms, having a good time, fairly directionless, but really enjoying it. And then the challenge was that if you're trying quite hard at school, when you sit down and you say to your teachers and your non-farming parents that actually you're quite keen on agriculture and want to have a crack at what there is to do there, they say, oh, that's very nice, but what's your actual job going to be? So, we got pushed fairly heavily towards setting off down a slightly more academic route by people that were maybe poorly informed on what I could do in agriculture, but ultimately we're just trying to do the right thing, I suppose. So found myself at university, not studying agriculture, on a course that didn't really excite me, but I was fairly aware that I was very lucky to have the opportunity that I did. But the hope of the farming career sort of hadn't been abandoned. It was just very much the can had been kicked down the road. And I was in my third year looking at options and was kind of Googling first generation farmers and came across at the time a report that had just been written by a guy called Rhys Williams, who's the photo at the very bottom of that slide. It was called Wealth Creation in Dairy Farming, and was sort of talking about farming in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. It was about numbers, about growing businesses, about building equity, kind of terms that were not really on my radar. And a couple of phone calls later, and I found myself driving from where I was based in Cambridge over to sort of meet Rhys on his dairy farm in West Wales, and got there. And people throw around that term, don't they, of life-changing events, and I hate those cliches so much. But if I was to pick one life-changing event that had happened, that really was it. I spent a couple of hours with Rhys in his kitchen, just talking about what he'd been up to. At the time, he was about to buy his first farm, and that was a goal that would definitely have never have been articulated to me before, but it sort of really clicked as a bit of a light bulb moment. Drove on back over the border, in silence, just thinking about all the stuff he'd said, and really, really loved it. And Rhys sort of set me off thinking about what could be the options. He said, come on back in the summer, spend a few weeks with us. So I came back and then met Matt Jackson, who was his herd manager at the time, who's in the top photo. Both of those guys are sort of royalty in the kind of grazing dairy world that I sort of live in. Rhys was absolutely killing it. Matt was just at the sort of journey. He was that rung on the ladder that was kind of between where I was and where I wanted to be like Rhys. And I was just thinking, okay, well, if these guys can do it, they were sort of showing me actually what you could achieve with a reasonable amount of perseverance and effort. And I was thinking, okay, that sounds very promising. So finished university, was looking at stuff that could be done more seriously. And both Rhys and Matt were saying, right, come and get on board. But if you want to do that, you've very much got to go to New Zealand. So off I went for 2 years and worked with these two couples, 1 year with each. Both were these amazing operators running fairly big multi-farm businesses in the South Island of New Zealand. I threw myself into every learning opportunity we possibly could: discussion groups, open days, conferences, anything that I could possibly do to learn. We went and stayed with some share milkers of the year to try and learn about breeding cows. We followed the vets around on days off to learn about what a cow looked like when she was having a calf. I was very conscious that I had stepped off this plane in Christchurch, not knowing what milk fever was. We were right at the beginning of the sort of dairy farm learning scale, and I felt like I was on this really, really steep learning curve. We were just focused on learning and trying to save, appreciating the sort of principle of farming at reasonable scale. I was very, very lucky to work for some amazing bosses in an amazing environment, and I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. So I spent 2 years out there, but at the time my dad was fairly poorly, and it kind of became apparent I should probably at least have a look at the options that were back in the UK. And I had sort of these two examples of Matt and Reese, who had been killing it over back here, and I kind of thought, okay, well, if those guys have managed it, then surely we should have a crack. So came back to the UK to sort of put into practice. I sort of had grand ambitions, at least, of putting into practice all these things I'd learned in New Zealand, and spent 6 years in total in the end, split between these two farms, one in Cumbria for Robert and Jackie Craig, and then in the Midlands, working for the Pilkington family. Both were fantastic farms, but I guess both, I think it would be fair to say there was a little bit of room to try and make some changes at both. Nothing very dramatic, but just with a little bit more intensity of effort in terms of how we manage cows and manage grass. And these principles I learned in New Zealand, we were able to make a few little changes, which were really rewarding, and were kind of gave me an opportunity to try and put into practice some of what I had learned in a fairly sheltered and supported environment. Carried on with this sort of intensity of trying to learn, carried on with this intensity of just trying to save money, and was kind of given the great opportunity to begin to learn a bit more about, we try to nail the technical stuff in New Zealand. I wanted to learn about the financials, and most importantly, I guess I wanted to become more confident, at least, with this sort of managing people and working relationships kind of both up and down the sort of chain of command. So spent 6 amazing years there, developing practical skills, I guess. Just please don't get put off by the small text. Okay, this is the only slide that has any level of detail. The rest is all pictures, I guarantee you, and we will spend time going through it. So while I was involved in the kind of management of these two farms, so if we look at this slide in front of us, the left-hand side is sort of showing sort of 2012, 2013, 2014 was in New Zealand. There is a scale at the side, I suppose. The numbers actually don't really matter. It's just the sort of direction of travel that we're trying to show. So while I was in New Zealand, I was surrounded by these people who were, and I had this story of Matt Jackson, who's buying heifers, building equity, buying stock, while doing this side hustle, while also working in a day job. And I was working in the day job, saving money. Came back to the UK, was still absolutely adamant that I was keen to try and get on this sort of stock growth path. And so then in this middle section between the two green lines was when I just sort of began to start trading stock, sort of beginning to learn a little bit about having some animals of my own, developing these very, very basic sort of accountancy and business skills. It all kind of began in 2015. Very fortunate, Robert Craig. There was some extra heifer calves born on his other farm. These were absolute rubbish. They were stock bull bred. They were late born. They were tiny little runty things, but was lucky to be given the opportunity to buy 20 of them. And they were the most precious animals I'd ever met in my whole life. So they were fantastic. Reared them at Roberts, paid him a sort of £1 a day basic fee to rear them. We talked about all different options of what I could do with them, if I could rear them off farm, if I was to rent some land myself. But eventually we sort of decided that actually there were real benefits to me and him of me being able to have my stock within his business. And then I was sort of very much focused on what was going on there. And following that same principle on, a year or so later, the farm was growing. We'd taken on some more land. There was some room to milk some more cows. And so Robert had said, okay, well, look, we can milk 70 more cows that we need to go buy. Do you want to buy some of them? Stupidly said, yeah, of course, absolutely. I want to buy every single one. Came up against that sort of publicised issue of access to capital in agriculture, and was needing to take on a bank loan. Ended up getting 26 grand of bank loan from, effectively it was set up via Robert's bank manager. Tried a few options myself, everyone said no. It was sort of the bank wanted those three things. They wanted sort of you to be able to show that you could service the debt, so good serviceability. They wanted this track record, and they wanted the security. Well, I could show that we could service the debt. I had this lease agreement. I was working for this great business with this great operator. I could show that we could service the debt. I didn't have this track record. You know, I was right at the beginning of this process, pardon me, and I didn't have the security. The one thing I did have was Robert in the background speaking to his bank manager, saying, actually, you know, this George guy's okay. So I was very lucky in the end to be able to get this 26 grand loan. It was secured against the government's enterprise finance guarantee. We paid a fortune for it in hindsight. I hope I never borrow money as expensive again, but that kind of got us up and running. And then, yeah, as we carried on, we're starting to get a bit more confident around building, sort of having some stock of my own. We started buying and selling bits and bobs of empty cows there and heifers there in the bottom in red. And sort of spent the next 4 years leasing out these cows and trading stock. And I guess we'd looked at the beginning and I had some examples previously of people who sort of rented ground, bought heifers, reared them themselves, put in the effort, winding up fences, doing their breaks, tending for them every day. Looked really hard at that as an option for myself, but was just always conscious of, I didn't want these 20 animals, 50 animals, whatever it was on the side, to be pulling away from the most important thing that was, you know, my day job. That was very much the driver of what we were hoping would come. And doing well in that was the driver. So was always conscious of not wanting to sort of take responsibility for these animals day to day myself. So was lucky to be able to find contract rearers, put them on lease agreements. I always had other people, I guess, doing the day-to-day thing, which meant that in the evenings, my time was then free, you know, rather than winding up a fence. I was able to have time to apply for every single tenancy, contract farming agreement, joint venture that came up, failed miserably at every single one, but we learned and learned and learned along the way. And eventually in 2019, you know, yeah, it was able to all pay off, and that's just what appears on the right hand side of that screen, but we can come back to that in due course if we want. So yeah, end of 2019, was really fortunate then to be awarded this contract farming agreement that was advertised at the Bisterne Estate in Hampshire. Sort of brief background to the estate. It's privately owned 3,500 acre estate. There's a dairy of about 1,250 acres of grass that sits in the middle, and we're milking now just under 600 cows. 1,250 acres, 600 cows, that sounds ludicrously lowly stocked, which it is, but there are sort of 400 acres of river meadows and another 100 acres of like these environmental schemes. And, you know, these areas are not managed for objectives that are around, you know, maximizing dry matter production. There are other KPIs that we are going for with them around conservation and breeding wetland birds and stuff I previously wasn't into, but we have rapidly learned to get involved in. Very free draining farm. We burn in the summer, but yeah, an awesome opportunity. So the history of that dairy was that it was built in 2001, and that kind of was saw the amalgamation of what were 3 dairy herds on that estate. So a big chunk of money had been put in building this big shiny rotary in 2001. That must have been an amazing site. And I would always tell people that I can't think of another 20-year-old parlour in the UK I would rather have. We are incredibly lucky, I think, in terms of what we have there. Over the past year, we've seen a little bit of infrastructure, well, not a little bit, we've seen a big chunk of infrastructure investment that's gone on, and we've sort of tried to make a few, hopefully positive changes. We've rebuilt the rotary, we've automated how it operates. We have built 2 new silage clamps there at the front, at the top of the screen, pardon me, they're very nearly finished. We've sort of redone the water system. We have reseeded 300 acres last autumn. That's about 57% of our milking platform. We've done some cow tracks. We have rolled 50% of the herd towards autumn calving. We're setting off down that kind of split block / probably more autumn calving pattern, having previously been spring. We're about to put in a borehole. We're spending some money on some slurry storage, and we are very much, we hope, setting the dairy up for the next 20 years. That absolutely is the goal. It's operated under a contract farming agreement. This everyone always says these are complicated. They are a little bit, but not impossible to understand. So it's an Anderson style contract farming agreement. My company puts in sort of the labor, the machinery, all the operational day-to-day stuff. The owner's company puts in the land and the fixed infrastructure. We both take returns. We trade through this sort of number 2 dairy account. And at the end of the year, anything that is left is split 70-30 in my favour, I guess, to sort of incentivise a bit of effort on my behalf. I am so lucky here to be involved in a fantastic, a fantastic farm owner. We have an open book relationship, that is built upon full trust of both of those parties. It's an excellent contract, don't get me wrong, but it is absolutely built on trust, and we have gone hard to go for full transparency while we learn to work with each other in this new trading structure. We would meet once a month, is our sort of, as that's how we operate. We meet once a month, we discuss the financials, we look at the capex updates, and I guess I couldn't be luckier to have that amazing thing of an owner who really cares, really cares, but is ultimately busy with other things. That is what we would all strive for in a business partner. If you're a young keen pup like me wanting to get going, we want someone to be involved with someone who cares but has other stuff on their mind, so that we are able to sort of spread our wings and do a few things. So I suppose kind of that's where we're up to today. I am struggling to get onto the next slide. I'm sure that will be fine shortly. There we are. So I guess that's all very interesting, but what probably is more interesting actually is for me at least, is to look at some of the drivers that are kind of behind this. And we always get told to do 7-3, so I've tried to narrow it down to 3, but there is just this one thing before. So I think these 2 pictures are wicked. I really love them. I've been very fortunate to have worked on a few farms, doing a range of things. If we're looking at the narrow field that is spring calving, block calving, grazing dairies. So we've worked on a big range within a small narrow field. One of those photos is from when I was in New Zealand. One of them is of our cows in Hampshire. They're both taken about a week before mating. I would challenge you to tell me which is which. I think they look remarkably similar. And I suppose that has been one of the key things that I've learned along the way, which sort of ties into this first thing I think that has helped driven what we've done, which is actually that, all of what we have tried to do is just built upon this very boring but important principle of needing to nail this technical performance. In a block calving, grazing dairy, but I'm sure in any agricultural business, there are a few physical KPIs that we need to, at the very least, understand and ideally try and execute. And in a grazing dairy, it just so happens that they are virtually identical no matter whereabouts in the world you are. This is real basics around grazing and cow management that I get really excited about. My girlfriend couldn't care less. The rearing heifers, the trading stock, all this other stuff in the previous slides, that was, that's been really exciting, really fun for me to be involved in, but that has ultimately not been the driver in what in helping us get to where we are with this contract farming agreement. It has absolutely just been built around practical day-to-day physical management. It's as simple as trying to be a good farmer, trying to know what these physical drivers are. We absolutely don't always nail it, but at least when we go wrong, we know what they are meant to be and how we can try and get back towards them. So I suppose that's been the sort of first thing, this technical performance. The second thing, this is not my own picture. As we've started to run out of our own pictures, we've had to look towards Google. But look, equally important in all of this has been sort of the role that other people have had in my luck of being able to make a little bit of progress quite quickly. Some of these people have had a major impact in what we've been trying to do. Others have been a little bit more minor, but they've all ultimately helped. So I've been so lucky in that grazing dairy industry to have found a sort of culture of openness, of information sharing, of people just being willing to offer time and help and advice, and then being prepared to, or be allowing me to sort of leverage some of my skills and ultimately my small amount of capital against other people's skills, and in reality their larger amounts of capital. That kind of relationship thing has been key in what we've done so far. And then I guess this final thing, and this sounds a bit like trite management speak, because it is so obvious, but actually ultimately it's these goals that we measure and that we go after. That's eventually where we end up excelling. And it comes down to, in my opinion, just deciding what you want to focus on and why. It's that old cliche, if you want milk per cow, you'll get milk per cow. But for me, it's been about that graph we had before, and it's been about driving equity growth. Every month we do this little mini balance sheet, which sounds very fancy, but it's looking on your online banking and just, at the beginning anyway, was looking on your online banking, seeing what was in your current account. As we've got a few more assets and a few more cows, it's got a little bit bigger, but it's ultimately still not complicated. And if my balance sheet, my equity, my balance sheet is showing that we're going up, I'm happy. If it goes down, then we're sad. It's as simple as that. I have been, I absolutely love these sort of the cows and the grass. I absolutely love that. But what I get really excited about too is, how they can help me achieve these sort of very specific goals around equity growth. And I suppose I've been lucky to have been able to make some progress just because we focus on a very, very small, narrow area. You can make quite a big progress in a narrow area when you really go after it. I had a boss in New Zealand that was amazing at this. She would say, think about what you want and why, write it down, and then, tell it to every single person that you meet. Which conveniently brings us on to this next point. So I am so lucky now. I would not have believed if you told me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago even, that I would be running this dairy where we are now. I would not have believed that opportunity would have been around the corner. That was this is an even better version of this childhood dream that I had. And most days it is absolutely amazing. I genuinely believe that. But there are still other goals that we want to go after. We haven't yet reached that sort of big, hairy, audacious goal that we want to go after. The desire one day, of course, as every kid, is that we want to buy a farm. That probably looks like 300 acres. That probably will be a dairy farm. Who knows we'll see what the market and the trading environment looks like when we get there. But that's absolutely the goal that we're going after. That is ultimately where this sort of equity growth thing is geared at. And if when we get to the stage of buying a farm, actually our goals have changed and we want to buy a yacht, that's fine. But currently that's not the plan. Currently the plan is to buy a dairy farm. That requires me to, continue to try and improve on that technical performance that we talked about. That requires me to continue to go really hard at trying to work out and leverage these relationships that we have, be they on farm or sort of in my wider support bubble. And I guess that requires a sort of continued very narrow focus on that one goal of equity growth. I suppose in pulling these short but hopefully sweetish slides together, there is the one thing that has been slightly disappointing to me in all of this presentation, I guess, is that none of it is particularly groundbreaking, but then I suppose at the same time that's actually potentially why it's actually also okay. This is a very well-trodden path that we're trying to go down, and I suppose I hope that's what sort of could help other people think that maybe some of these steps that I've done are very replicable. And I suppose again it's that sort of ungroundbreaking, well-trodden path type message that makes me feel that actually some of these big scary goals around farm ownership that we want to go after, they've all been achieved by other people before me, and maybe that's what gives me some confidence that they might be able to be achieved by myself in the future. I think in terms of the formal bit that I have looked to prepare, that's basically it. I'm very happy to take some questions on anything that we've covered in the slide or broader, wider dairy type stuff too.
Excellent. Thanks very much, George. Yeah, so if anybody has got any questions, and now's the time to, I think, turn on videos and mics and whatnot and get stuck in. I certainly have got a question to start you off with. For someone else, George, that was looking to, I don't know, get onto the, take the first step onto the ladder like you did all those years ago. Probably, what's your best bit of advice for someone that is looking to get involved? What would you tell them if they were asking you?
That's a good question. So I would say there's an amazing thing about grazing dairies, which is that they are incredibly simple and just require you to know a few basic things and then be prepared to put in a reasonable amount of effort. So if you're happy to put in that effort and you're prepared to just learn these very basic things, there is an amazing opportunity there in the grazing dairy industry that I haven't seen necessarily in other sectors. Yes, there is some capital involved, but it's not monstrous compared to other sectors of the ag industry. And actually, possibly, when the milk price is okay, we should add, there is an opportunity to make some reasonable returns. That means there is this almost unique opportunity in grazing dairies that if you're prepared to put in the effort and learn these basic things, there is a chance for you to add real value to a business. So I suppose in answer to your question, what would be the advice I would say, and I'm incredibly biased, of course I am, but focus in on that grazing dairy industry. That is where there is this opportunity, and it's when you can start adding value, that's when you can then leverage that start growing your capital. You know, it's unfortunate, but it's life, isn't it? That you put in the effort first, and then the chances to sort of have the reward come afterwards. People get disenfranchised in that initial bit where you're putting in the effort and you don't feel like you're getting the reward. It is just around the corner, and people are prone to jumping off the bandwagon too soon. So I'd say focus on the area, get the technical skills. There is so much information out there. Surround yourself by some sort of great people, and then just keep sticking at it. And it comes back to what we said earlier, the buying and selling stock and stuff. That's what people get excited about when they come and chat. You know, the thought of buying and selling a few heifers, that's really exciting. Every new person in agriculture wants to have their own animals, be their own little farmer. That is not the driver. It is picking the right sector and trying to be good at it. That's what the driver is.
Yeah. That's good answer. Thanks very much. Sue, you have got your hand up if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, George. That was a really interesting talk and heartfelt. It was brilliant to see when you put that graph up with the green lines on at the beginning, the kind of trajectory you had. And you've just talked about what it felt like to be disenfranchised at certain points, and the likelihood of people giving up before they finally get to any point of success. I just wondered if you could give us some ideas. You've talked about drive, but what is it people need when you're applying here, there and everywhere and nothing is happening? And you think, how can I ever get into this industry?
That's a cool question. So the initial bit for me of that sort of graph, if I was more technically savvy, I would figure out how to get it back, but never mind. The initial bit of that graph on the left, so that was that was really stimulating and interesting and engaging. It was all new. I was learning heaps. I felt way out of my comfort zone. So that was awesome. And was also just trying to save money. I didn't have a particularly crazy lifestyle and was just able to save some money. The next bit is where you begin to fall off the bandwagon. So I felt like I'd been saving really hard. I'd started buying some stock. I had no cash and I felt absolutely broke. And I couldn't understand why, having worked what I felt was fairly hard and had tried to save money, I now felt like I had no money. That's when I started doing this monthly equity graph thing, because that for me was what kept me sort of strapped in on the bandwagon. You know, we were chugging along this path, and actually as long as I could see on that spreadsheet that things were just ticking along, no matter how slowly, then it was okay. So I suppose that for me was the real stimulator. It was, that was very much the stick that I used to drive myself, was just looking at that graph. I would very happily, so my sister, say she's not involved in farming, has a far more exciting lifestyle than I do. She would say, you know, an equity spreadsheet is not a way to measure how well your life is going when you're in your 20s. She is absolutely right. Of course she is. I couldn't possibly disagree with that. But if you have a narrow goal that you want to go after, yeah, great. We could go to Barbados every year, but we're not going to make progress on that graph. So I found that graph to be the thing that was what was able to really motivate me. When sometimes if you looked in your bank account or looked at your day job, it didn't feel like things were changing that quickly. Things just ticking along on the graph in the background were what I suppose kept me slightly more focused. Does that make sense?
Totally. Thank you, George.
Tom, I think you've got your hand up. There's a question there.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. George, I've got about 1 million questions, to be fair. But firstly, you're set up with your grazing. Why the movement to an autumn calving little mini block to start with? You put in you put in loads of infrastructure. And I understand that grazing is surely hopefully the cheap way, but God, I know what silage camps cost to put in and blah, blah, blah. And it's obviously got a very good partner there. But I'm just wondering really that the thinking, and obviously the farm burns up in the summer, but yeah, enlighten me a bit more, please.
Okay, so we are a reasonable size. So we had this reasonable sized parlour. We had this reasonable sized historic infrastructure. We're part of a biggish estate, a reasonable sized estate, and me and the owner have certain for me, loan repayment targets that I have to hit. We needed this certain size business that could deliver these returns to us so that we could hit our own or meet our own individual financial goals. So we needed to milk this certain number of cows or produce this certain amount of milk, which sort of on the system for us meant we needed a certain number of cows. The dairy had been built 20 years ago. It had been well depreciated. If we look at the sort of depreciation schedule it was on, it was fairly well depreciated when we came along. There was some stuff that we needed to invest in to just make us compliant with stuff that Arla Red Tractor quite rightly wants. We were not spending any money for the next 20 years, and carrying on dairy farming was not an option. So we had to spend some money anyway, just to get things up to scratch. And we wanted this business that was big enough to support having multiple parties and multiple stakeholders. So we needed to spend some money for compliance, health and safety, and just our desire to be good farmers. The silage bits that we had weren't safe. We were looking at options of, we needed a way, if we'd stayed, we were initially thinking of staying spring calving, pardon me. We needed a way to feed a reasonable number of cows in the summer, and we needed a silage clamp to store some feed on. That was going to end up being the same amount of concrete as it would have been to do a self-feed silage clamp. So once we started, and we, as a business, we were suffering in the summer with this free draining soil with moderate rainfall. So we were already making all of this purchase feed, all of this sort of, buying in this purchase feed and storing all of this saved grass as silage that an autumn calving farmer would have. And then rather than just efficiently feeding it back for a limited number of months in the autumn to some fresh cows that we could put some purchase feed into and crank some milk out of, instead we were feeding it for this long protracted period through the summer to try and get us through these summer months. We were trying to serve cows at a time of year where it was hot. The grass was very stemmy, very reproductive, very poor quality. So we were, I shouldn't necessarily speak for the estate, but as an estate, we decided we wanted to stay in dairy. We knew that we needed to spend some money to carry on doing so. And then as a business, I say, as sort of me and the owner, we were looking at like a long-term view, thinking, okay, well, actually, if we reset the rule book, this is ultimately not a really efficient spring calving dairy farm. This looks, from an outsider's perspective, looking in, like it would be better suited to autumn calving. We need to put some infrastructure in anyway. That infrastructure can be well spec'd for autumn calving. And the hope was and is that we will create a much more resilient, simple business by doing that. It just so happens that it helps us with seasonality, all that kind of wider milk industry type stuff. It just happens that it helps that. But that ultimately wasn't the driver. It was the feed thing that was making it crazy. We were a spring calving farm with a high cost of feeding cows.
Very good answer. And you answered my other question, which was milk buyer, and it does make a big difference. And I'm fortunate enough to be on the same Arla TSTG, so it does make a huge difference.
Completely. So we would be Arla Morrison's. Arla Morrison's. We're doing grazing. We are high solids. We're now getting back to a more beneficial sort of seasonality profile. We have got room for a trailer. We are doing school visits when we can. We are trying very hard to be a good Arla farmer. I think the milk price is there to reward that. Not everyone would agree, but I think that Arla are currently at least rewarding that. Yeah,
I'd agree. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you there. We're also fortunate enough to be on an Arla contract. How did that come about? Was the Arla contract already with the farm, or did you?
It was already there. Yeah, that's it. And that, that is not only have we got a great landowner, we've got a really good farm and a good milk contract. I am very lucky. I could not stress that enough. Okay. Yeah, we're trying hard, but ultimately there are some things in the background which I'm very fortunate about. I would love to say that I waited for the right opportunity and went for it. That is absolutely not the case. I applied for far worse things and would have definitely jumped at them given the chance. So just lucky that they turned me down and this one came along.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Obviously, we've spoken a bit about your farm. Staffing wise, how many people have you got working for you? And sort of as an extension to that, do you have any desire to give them the opportunity at some point to, also get on the ladder and start on their way? And if so, how are you thinking about doing that?
Good. Yeah. So 5 full-time for sort of 600 cows and about 350 young stock. Parlour's quite simple. Probably the wider estate stuff is quite complicated. We're not really labour efficient, but we're not horrendous either. And I would readily acknowledge that we probably expect people to work quite hard. Yeah, absolutely, I expect people to work quite hard, but we try and, we pay well, we try and create a great work environment. We are lucky the estate has some good houses that we can rent. So, you know, 5 of us full time, they put in a shift and we put in a shift, and I'm very grateful for that. In terms of going forward, yeah, crikey, absolutely. So I have been, it's a win-win, isn't it? This whole partnership thing, you know, I have been on one side of that win-win relationship, but I can also see how it, for example, the one we're in now really benefits the landowner. I can see how the ones that I've done previously with cow leases and stuff, I can see how that would also benefit what was the farmer at the time. So 100%, I would be delighted if one of my guys or girls came to me and said, yeah, you know what, George, I've saved up, I've been working hard, we've saved some money during COVID, I really want to buy 10 heifer calves. That would be, I would be delighted at that. The one, I guess the one caveat I would say with that is, you know, that is a point on that journey. Probably we have a fairly young, fairly inexperienced team. Some of those team just don't want those things. Totally respect that. Some of those team probably one day might want those things, but are still at a different stage of that kind of progression. So with some of those guys, you know, we need to make sure we are mailing some animal health stuff. We want to learn about measuring and allocating grass. We are getting onto some sort of financial type stuff, and eventually, hopefully, the light bulb will go off and we'll think, okay, cool, well, this is what the option is. So yes, 100% would love to do that. I've been very lucky. The team that I have aren't doing anything like that yet, but they're probably just at a different stage or on a different pathway for now.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? So I have got a couple more jotted down here. I, like Tom, have got absolutely heaps.
Chris, it's Duncan here. I don't know whether you can hear me. I'm just intrigued to know, when you were bidding for the contract farming arrangement, you would have been up against quite a lot of probably better capitalised people with probably more sort of experience or a stronger CV sitting behind them on paper anyway. Why did they choose you?
Good question. Good question, which I'm not the person to answer. There have been other contract farming agreements advertised that have been more competitive. So not a lot of keen young dairy farmers want to be down in Hampshire. There's quite a lot of keen young dairy farmers in sort of North Wales and Cheshire. Those opportunities tend to be more competitive. If you're happy to be in an area that's not a prime dairy area, I'm not offending anyone by saying that the southeast probably is not conventionally a prime dairy area. There's less applicants for a role like that. I would also say that actually the agreement that we're in, capital wasn't the thing that was going to be, capital from me, wasn't the thing that was going to make or break whether or not I got that agreement. The minimum that we could have gone in with was the machinery to run it. I was given the opportunity to buy a chunk of the cows as well, so that was an additional thing. But basically, what was advertised was someone to come and run the dairy, employ the people, provide the machinery. We have about 150 grand's worth of kit on that farm. Most of that is as two Kubota tractors that were about 100 grand, 45 grand, 55 grand between the two of them. Most of that you can finance. So actually, there was an opportunity to get involved in a reasonably large business for not, bank manager would say, you know, we talk about big numbers and small numbers, and some people's big numbers and some people's small numbers. 70 grand's worth of kit 2 years ago is a huge chunk of money, but it's not an unachievable amount of money for somebody to save. There's plenty of young people saving up the same amount of money for a house deposit. It just happens that my house deposit is in some machinery and some cows. So yeah, there probably were people that had more capital, but capital wasn't the thing that was going to get it over the line. There were some other strong applicants, but I think there have been others that have been even more competitive. Why did they give it to me? Good question. I had worked pretty hard at trying to have some good references. I had worked pretty hard in trying to have a good reputation. I had I put a lot of effort into the application. We really did put a lot of effort into the application. Was always very open and transparent with the owner right from the start about what we wanted to achieve. Promised some fairly ambitious numbers that we just need to deliver on. Yeah, it's a good question, Duncan. Probably those things.
Okay, thank you.
Sort of on the subject, sorry, has anyone else got any more questions before I butt in again?
Yeah, can I have a go?
Please do.
Christopher, please. Jan Ledoux, very well done. It was terrific effort been put into all this, and I take my hat off to you, especially having farmed in Hampshire myself, and I know what it's like to try and grow grass there. Interested in your final slides, what is next? And you saying about being understocked where you are. Is there scope to increase the number of cows that you milk there, do you think? Or is your next step to take on, once your equity curve keeps going up and up and up, is your next step to try and take on another dairy elsewhere before stepping off into the farm purchase job? Or do you think to step from where you are now directly, hopefully, into purchasing a farm?
That is a very good and very current and relevant thing that is in my mind. So I don't think the next thing we do will be buying a farm. I sort of would joke with my girlfriend that it'll be the third farm that will be the one that we try and buy. He says incredibly over optimistically, with one farm that is barely under control, but never mind. The current farm is fantastic. It would put a lot of pressure on that one to put a huge amount of debt against it, yeah, on a high milk price, fantastic. On a low milk price, I can imagine that being a real struggle. So I don't think the next step will be buying a farm. I think the short term option is we need to get technically better, and there's probably an opportunity for me to have a little bit more capital in the farm that I'm involved in currently. So then it's, what is the next thing in between? We could milk more cows. We could milk more cows, but we need to get confident about how much grass we can grow. And my hesitation is that I don't want to create a monster. 600 cows is a nice size. It's not massive. We've got a small team. We can get to know the cows really well. We don't have to walk cows too far. One person, I can deal with most problems. It doesn't feel like it's this absolute monster that's really hard to control. And I would be nervous if we set off to milk 1,000 grazing cows there. Actually, things would get a bit too big. Some of the sort of biological advantages that you have when you have a fairly small limit, a farm that is not vast, that we don't want to lose those sort of efficiencies that we can have by having a fairly small farm, fairly contained dairy. I don't think there's an appetite on the estate to milk an unlimited amount of cows. I don't think the appetite is there to necessarily have another dairy unit. So actually, I suppose the answer to your question is get a bit better at what we're doing, probably try and replicate what we're doing somewhere else, and then maybe we try and buy something as a third option. Yeah, would add, that makes it sound like things are very under control currently. There are days when I can show you plenty of stuff that is not fully under control. So,
thanks.
Have we any more questions, please?
Just as a general comment, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm in my 70s, and when I was a bit younger than probably you are now, the route into dairying was through a council farms, and that was in the late 1960s, early 70s. And I had friends who went in that route, started with 50 or 60 cows, worked their way up, moved from council farm to tenanted farm to owned farm, and there was a definite sort of stepping stone at that stage, and that was it. That sort of disappeared through the, I don't know, once the milk board went, I suppose, to a certain extent. But it's interesting to see this different route in that you've taken, and again, I take my hat off to you, and interesting to see that you're major KPI is looking at your equity, because I worked my way into the industry with sheep in the same sort of way, and I was always happy as long as my equity was going up.
Yeah, the council thing's really interesting. So we're involved in a fairly big dairy. But actually, I needed less capital, I would argue, to get into this than I would have if I'd wanted to do a 50, 100 cow council farm by myself. That actually probably would have been a bigger capital threshold to meet. There would have been less track record there for the bank to get excited about. There was less scale there to mean we could sort of hit loan repayments, and probably it wouldn't have offered me as sort of quite as good a quality of life. I think I can think of examples of people that have set off on council farming routes and have sort of hit a ceiling quite quickly, and really struggled to go on from there. I'm very fortunate that by taking a slightly different route, we have been able to do something else. And I guess also the thing that I would still think about a lot is that, you know, I'm very conscious from when we were in New Zealand, we are doing stuff to maximize our milk price and selling to a fantastic customer in Ireland. However, we are simply producing milk or milk solids on a global market. There are some very big, very efficient farms out there to run incredibly well. I would be nervous if I was setting off on a county council farm about whether that was still going to be a viable business in 15, 20 years time. You know, halfway through my career, if I was setting off on a county council farm, am I going to create a business that is just simply not of a scale that is able to survive anymore? I don't know. That I would just be nervous about that, I suppose. And I'm very fortunate, having gone a slightly different way, to have been able to access a business that's got slightly more scale, and therefore I hope a little bit more longevity.
I mean, the other amazing thing you have in your favour now is interest rates, of course.
If you could just tell my bank manager that'd be fantastic. I seem to still get quite high ones from them.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not double digit though.
No, you're completely right. Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
We have got another, I think, 9 minutes left if we're hoping to finish at 7 o'clock. So yeah, with that in mind, have we any more questions, please?
I've got one more, Chris, if I can.
Yeah, go for it.
Just wondering if you're going to change your breeding, if you're going more autumn calving and look to push your yields up, or and how will you do it? Will you start calving in I don't know, July, August, and house them and go more intensive like that?
Good question. So yeah, we took on 550 crossbreedy Kiwi kind of cows, possibly that were sort of headed, that would have been well suited to a kind of once a day type of direction of travel. That just wasn't going to deliver the returns that we needed, I suppose we talked about earlier. But we have a high health status. And there was no desire within the estate for us to bring in a different herd of cows. So the herd that we have is the herd that there was not an option to trade that out. And having said that, you know, crossbreedy cows, not everyone's cup of tea, but they are fertile. They do good milk solids. They do have good lameness. You know, there are benefits to that type of cow. However, there is also an opportunity for us to milk a slightly bigger cow that can produce slightly more milk in a slightly more intensive system. So yeah, we are mating everything to a New Zealand and an Irish Friesian. Our current cows probably are about 500 kilos, and we sold 509 kilos of milk solids last year. So that's kind of where we're at. I would be very comfortable adding 50, maybe 80 kilos of live weight to our cows. And if we could also at the same time add 50 to 80 kilos of milk solids to our cows, that would be ideal. We're lucky as well, I suppose, with us sort of being prepared to let our calving patterns slip from spring to autumn. So yeah, we are now, autumns are starting 1st of August. There's an opportunity, isn't there, while we rotate a few cows around, for us to just have a little bit of a dip our toes in the water with sex semen. We did that quite a lot last year, and actually it went better than we had hoped. So so as we get confident with sex semen, there's a chance for us to breed off better cows. If you come down to the farm in, I don't know, 10 years definitely, but in 5 years time, we will have a slightly different herd of cows to that which we have now. They will be slightly bigger, they will be hopefully slightly milkier, and they will be more black and white. And again, stuff that you guys who are involved in dairy would all know. You know, Arla are fantastic. The bull calf thing is completely the correct direction of travel for us as an industry. fully behind that as a goal. We had a herd of cows that was vulnerable to that as a medium. I think they got a medium live weight or low live weight herd. We were vulnerable to a change in policy of bull calves. We absolutely need to make sure that we are resilient to that going forward. That's not going to, that is not policy that's going to change, is it? That's only going to stay. So yeah, a slightly larger, slightly higher live weight cow would be great. We're lucky as well, aren't we? Hampshire is not, we are not on some steep hill farm in North Wales. We can handle a slightly bigger cow walking along in the sunshine on a very flat track in Hampshire. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have we any more questions, please? And if not, I've certainly got another one. Just very quickly, obviously, you mentioned an awful lot of what you call luck. You've been lucky to get a tenancy, lucky to or to have this opportunity. Sorry, lucky with this, that, and the other. Actually, it sounds like obviously there's a whole lot of hard work gone into that as well. In terms of getting hold of the farm that you're actually on at the moment, it sounds like you've looked at a lot of other opportunities before getting to where you are now. How did you sort of get your name out there, and how did you what were your best routes for getting your name out there and finding these opportunities, really?
Good question. That's a good question. So farming is amazing. Dairy farming anyway, grazing dairy farming even, is amazing in that people are very open, very happy to chat and have quite heartfelt conversations with people they don't know very well. And so if as a young keen person, I have been fortunate, if as a young keen person you contact a dairy farmer, a grazing dairy farmer, say, I am interested in what you do, can I come and see you for a chat? They have always said yes. And you go and see them, and then they say, oh, and while you're here, you should make sure you chat to so-and-so, and they put you in touch with so-and-so. And suddenly you get this quite wide network sort of unfolding in front of you. And they lead towards sort of some professionals who are involved in the industry. And eventually sight of these good opportunities that are sort of in the pipeline. So it's just been that sort of networking thing that has given me sight of these opportunities that are coming, and it just so happens then that the one that we've ended up getting has been a really great one. Has been the potential to be a really great one. We are on the track. There's some stuff we can do better, but yeah, certainly looks like it could be okay.
Brilliant. Well, that's probably about all we've got time for. I think probably on behalf of everyone in this call, George, I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time to speak to us. It's been really, really interesting hearing about your story, hearing about how you've gotten to where you are now, and I think even more exciting hearing about what the future holds. And I've got no doubt that we'll end up, it's a name that's going to crop up very, very often in dairy farming circles going forwards. So thanks ever so much for speaking to us. And as I say, we may well try and organise a visit down to you at some point soon.